Pete Souza, nice to talk to you. Thanks for chatting with me. I feel like we're here to talk about photos, which we're going to get to, but there's so much more to discuss. How are you? How's it going?
It's going okay. I mean, as a I guess former photojournalist, I wished in some ways that I had been in DC yesterday, because that is kind of inherently in my blood. But at the same time, that was kind of another life ago, and I'm so proud of my many friends who did such admirable work yesterday under really stressful conditions. So kudos to them.
Yeah, absolutely. You're in Madison, Wisconsin right now. It is weird to be a journalist, right? And not in a place where news is breaking, and to be on the outside. But also I feel like sometimes I watch what's unfolding and I scream at the television because I almost feel like, for me, and I think maybe for you, we've seen a lot of this coming. I mean, I don't know how people didn't see what happened coming.
Absolutely. I've thought about this for 4 years. I didn't ever predict that it would lead to this necessarily, but always felt that a lot of bad things were going to happen during this administration, and that the man in charge was incapable of responding to it in an effective way. And we saw that with so many issues, especially this past year with COVID and trying to respond to the many peaceful protests around the country. He's just incapable of responding as a leader should.
It's been weird for me, and I was just reading that there's been a large number of Capitol Police officers who've been injured. I guess they were hit by pipes. One, according to some reporting, is in critical condition, but there has not been a lot of updates on that. So that was the first that I had read. But one thing that really struck me was just how different the reaction was. In many cases, there's video of people just meandering into the Capitol. I mean, and I've seen so many protests, and I know you've covered a number of protests that were often nonviolent protests, and there's just so much more force. And I guess it always saddens me because it's a very stark reminder, some of those pictures, and often it's video, of just the difference in how people are treated and how they expect to be treated by law enforcement, frankly.
I mean, I think there's two issues going on. Is the difference between the way people of color are treated in protests. If those that had been all African American or people of color, would it have had a different outcome from law enforcement? But I think the other thing that is already being talked about on the Hill is, are the Capitol Hill police really set up to thwart this kind of a protest? I mean, usually, in my experience of being on the Hill when protests break out, it's always very peaceful. It's people that infiltrate a hearing, and they shout out and they wave their signs, and they expect to get arrested, and they're carted off, and there's no violence. It's over and done with in 15 or 30 seconds. But obviously these people were there to resist any kind of law enforcement interaction. And so I think a lot of there's going to be a lot of discussion in the coming weeks and months about the capabilities of the Capitol Hill police in situations like this.
There was a video, and I know as a photographer, you look for that thing that speaks volumes, right? And it's a black officer, and he's stopping this crowd that's coming through, and then they keep moving on him, so he steps back up, and you can see him calling for, I assume, backup. But he keeps stepping back and keeps stepping back. And now he's stepping back, but upstairs, right? And they're coming up to the second floor. And it was so anxiety provoking and so upsetting because you could see people are marching with Confederate flags. And we know there was a noose that was set up as well. He's a black police officer. It's a massive crowd coming at him. And he has literally no way of defending himself in a lot of ways, right? He keeps backing up. And it was so anxiety provoking for me to just watch a video clip. And I know how it all ended, right? So it's, I just...
No, I saw that video clip too, and it's hard to put yourself in that officer's shoes in that individual case. The question really is, why were there not other officers there with him?
I heart broke for him.
According to the D.C. police chief, the chief of police that I heard on a press conference today, he said the Capitol Hill police, which they assisted the D.C. police when they were called in many hours later, that the Capitol Hill police has a force of almost 2,000 officers. Well, they clearly did not have that many people there yesterday, and the question is, why not? Why was not at least half the force out yesterday? So I think there's going to be a lot of questions that journalists such as yourself or journalists that cover Capitol Hill are going to have to ask.
There are a number of journalists who were talking about how they just, I can't believe it. I never thought I'd see such a thing. And I literally, speaking about throwing things at the TV, wanted to say, or sometimes at Twitter, that there was an invite to a rally that was called Storm the Capitol. I'm not the most on top of what's happening day to day anymore, since I don't anchor a daily show. But I knew that there was a rally. I knew that people had been told that a vote had been stolen. I knew that people wanted to storm the Capitol and take back the vote. I knew that these are similar people who have in the past threatened violence. They're the same people who go to rallies. I knew that they'd bring Confederate flags, that they'd wear T-shirts about Auschwitz. Again, I'm not the most connected person. I don't cover Capitol Hill, certainly. And I guess sometimes I get so frustrated because I feel like this entire 5 years, let's call it, of Donald Trump running for office and being in office, reporters play catch up, a bit of catch up. Of course that was going to happen. People talk openly on social media about violence at these events. They post videos of themselves. They're being caught today because they've posted videos of themselves storming the Capitol and explaining very clearly what they're trying to do, which is illegal. I don't understand how people don't understand how we've gotten to this moment. And I'm emotional about it, and I'm upset, so maybe I'm not very forgiving today.
That really resonates with me, what you're questioning. At the White House, since 9/11, there's been a Homeland Security advisor whose job it is to monitor social media, just all the kind of different domestic terrorist threats that are coming in. So why didn't that person, assuming they were doing their job, not only communicate it to the inner sanctum of the White House, but why did they not share that information with law enforcement, the entity in D.C.? Why did not Capitol Hill police know about this? Why did not the D.C. police know about this? It was right out there, out in the open on social media. And there's a breakdown somewhere. And I don't know if that is in the Homeland Security Office itself or in the communication with these law enforcement agencies within, D.C. For your listeners, they may not understand. In the District of Columbia, you have the Secret Service that protects the White House and the president. You have the Park Police that protects the national parks and some streets and parks. You have the Capitol Hill Police, who protect the Capitol, and then you have the D.C. Metro Police. So there's a lot of different law enforcement agencies within D.C., and there should be coordination between all of them.
In your photos, especially, I mean, you've covered a lot of presidents and people, but especially, I think, what I loved, and I'm a big fan of your work, but what I loved about your photos of President Obama is that you managed to capture conversations about race in a photo. And that's I think a really challenging thing to do. I think people have a hard time capturing conversations about race and conversations about race. Like, even when they're speaking, they don't manage to kind of get to the thing that's the thing. And there's a great photo, which everybody knows, of the little black boy, who's rubbing President Obama's head, who's leaned down, right? And it's a cute photo of a little kid, but it speaks so much more, right, about being seen and identifying and that connection. And I think that is what makes that photo and a lot of your photos powerful. How do you see this conversation, or lack sometimes of conversation, around race that we had, I think, overtly when President Obama was in office, and now overtly in different ways, in unpleasant and ugly ways, that President Trump is in office? Through your photographer's lens, how do you see it, and how do you see the difference?
It's kind of incredible that we went from the country electing its first African American president to the next president being someone who started his campaign with racial divisiveness. It's like it just really shows you how divided we are in the country on racial issues, for one. I guess, I thought of my job when I was the chief official White House photographer for President Obama, that I was photographing the President of the United States. But I was also photographing, and I was aware of the fact that I was photographing the first African-American president. So there were certain instances, you mentioned one particular photograph, but it happened many times where the interaction on a just random kind of basis, I knew would really resonate with people of color, with the African-American community. And that I had to be super aware of when those moments were about to happen, and try to photograph them in a way that it would resonate not just in the moment, but in years to come. I mean, you're talking about a photograph that was made in 2009, so that's 11 years ago, and yet it still has some resonance, I think, with people. And those are the kind of images that I was trying to make, and do it in a way where, they were authentic, and you either get it or you don't. But sometimes it all comes together, and the image is just hopefully seared in people's brain in a positive way.
Now, some of those images that I think capture a racial moment, if you will, have been Black people being booed at rallies, right, or being escorted out, that just are very harsh, and the opposite of this sense of belonging that was in that quiet photo. I see these photos from these rallies, or what the rallies the president has had, and you see a photo that also has a lot of meaning, but it's a lot of horrible meaning, right? This, it reminds me of those pictures back in the 60s of Black people being set on by dogs, or somebody being dragged, and you can feel in your heart, like you feel so much sympathy for the person, because you realize you're seeing a snapshot in time about a moment that is occurring in the country, and it's a bad moment. How are you? I'm a very naturally optimistic person, so I've been incredibly pessimistic, I think, over the last few years for a host of reasons. Are you optimistic about what is what has unfolded and what is going to potentially unfold over the next 4 years?
I'm worried about the next 2 weeks, to be honest with you.
I wish I could say I think you're joking, but I know you're not.
I'm not joking. I think the one positivity and the one feeling of hope that I have is, I know Joe Biden really well, and I feel that he's a good man. He's a decent man. That if anything, he will command decency and respect of everybody that works for him, and the way he presents himself to the country. He's going to do his best to heal. I think it's helpful, I guess, in a way, that he has as his partner a woman of color. I mean, having a woman vice president and a woman of, and a person of color, I think is symbolically extremely important. And Kamala is obviously, a very capable leader for the country, and I think that's gonna really help. I hope.
You don't sound super optimistic. You sound like me.
Well,
like, I want to be optimistic, but I'm not. I'm also a realistic human being.
It's I sort of mentioned that I call myself a former photojournalist, but every once in a while I try to get out there and do some work on sort of on my own. So I made a picture a couple months ago. It was right after the election, but before the election was called for Joe Biden, and there was a little protest here at the state capitol in Madison. So I went up there to photograph. And I have this picture that, to me, just sort of sums up everything about this year. It's a white woman screaming nose to nose in the face of a young black guy. I don't know if I guess he's either late teens or early 20s. She does not have a mask on. He has a mask on. And she's screaming in his face, and he's just kind of turning away with that look, like, and just held it together and did not really react to her in any kind of a way. And to me, that sort of sums up where we are right now as a country. And that, I think the vile in that woman's face just gives me pause on how difficult it is going to be to heal our racial and political wounds, if you will.
Yeah, I feel the same way. When you watch these protesters going in through Congress, holding a Confederate flag and wearing T-shirts about Auschwitz, for a long time, I've been pushing back on people who like to talk about economic anxiety, because I think I think actually a lot of people are, even pre-COVID, clearly, like that's been America for a certain, income of people for a long time. This anxiety of the constant struggle for people who are poor, the chronic struggle for people who are middle class, the, oh my God, are we going to drop out of the middle class struggle? For people who are a little bit better, are we going to be able to maintain this so our kids could do better, right? So I think economic anxiety is across the board. But I think reporters really missed the boat when, for a long time, they talked a lot about the appeal of Donald Trump as an economic anxiety issue. And I would mock it constantly, because I'm often infuriated by this sort of reluctance to just deal with, if you're carrying a Confederate flag into the Capitol, you're making a statement that is racist. If you're wearing a T-shirt that basically says, there was one person who's wearing a T-shirt that has the initials of 6 million is not enough. Right, that 6 million Jews being killed by Hitler was not enough, is what it's referring to. Like, these things are so despicable and so horrible. And the media is so reluctant to be like, no, that is horrible. And that person, and they frame it as, let's go back and check in at the diner and talk about how they're feeling in Trump's America. I find it incredibly...
Well, I mean, think about how he essentially led up to running for president. he got a lot of attention by the cable TV and the networks on the birther issue. And every
Yes.
time that he would
Racist.
talk about it, it would be covered by those networks and cable TV. Why? I mean, it was clear that it was BS, and yet they gave him the platform, as did, Twitter and Facebook.
But it's interesting the way you talk about that, right? Which is, it wasn't even covered as, it was covered as, we got to cover this story. Is it, in fact, President Obama's birth certificate, right? So it was covered as a serious story when everybody knew it was bullshit. And then the other piece of it is, it was never covered as, this is racist. Like, let's be really clear. The people who are part of this conversation, it's racist, and I just will never forgive. It's going to take me a long time to forgive a lot of people in the media for what I think they failed to do in the run-up to President Trump's election and afterwards. I mean, I think they elevated a lot of these crazy people. They gave them a lot of airtime, which has led us to where we were yesterday. What do you do now? I mean, I know you work on books, but you're clearly, I was going to say, you called yourself former, so, but then you're describing going out to do a shoot at a protest, which is the definition of not former.
Yeah, but I also, I'm very active on Instagram. That's my main, platform these days. But, I also posted galleries last week on my granddaughter, and the year of a tree. So I'm doing some other types of photography. And part of that is just COVID has kind of shut me down because I'm in that age group and I have kind of a underlying health condition that I do not want to get this virus. So I've been super careful about what I do. I do hope that once January 20th passes and I can stop shading the current president, and once we're at or close to herd immunity, hopefully by the summer, that I can get out there and maybe do some in-depth projects. But just right now, I'm just trying to stay close to home.
Trevor Noah calls you one of Trump's, or maybe the biggest Trump troll. Did you go into that thinking that would be your strategy, or did it start with, because when I saw you start doing it, it was, you would just post a photo. That was kind of like the visual representation of calling bullshit on something. Like, it was like,
yeah.
Let me post this photo because you'll see, here's the evidence that what he has just said is not true. But then you kind of got more specific and more, I think, explicit about what you were trying to say in that photo, really telling people specifically, this thing is a lie. What the President Trump is saying is a lie.
Well, I think part of it was that why other people didn't catch on to this, but I knew from day one that the guy was just a con man, right? This is pretty obvious to me. And so that was kind of like my early approach. And then as that first year went by and I realized that he was a dangerous con man, that I felt that I couldn't just sit by and not do anything. That I had to speak out. I mean, I'm a citizen. I'm an American first, and I just felt compelled that I had no choice. That I had to do this, and I could do it in a unique way. And I could also say, even though I was mostly using pictures of President Obama, I could also say, look, I also worked for President Reagan. This is not a partisan thing. This is about the office of the presidency and respecting that office. And this guy was not doing that. And I didn't know that it would lead to the greatest pandemic in our history. I didn't know it would lead to him inciting his supporters to overtake the Capitol, but I knew he was doing dangerous things, and it was not gonna end well.
Is the job of the photographer generally, and maybe the White House photographer specifically, whether it was Reagan or Obama or anybody who's, taking a photo of an individual, to figure out how to capture their humanity? I mean, I feel like that's one of the things that's missing in those Trump photos, right? There's no humanity. And the same thing is when I've done a PR shot because I'm launching a show, right? It's like, do you look pretty? Are you, is the picture framed well? And can we put it on posters? Good. That's what we're looking for. It seems like, photographers who work capturing what's really happening in a presidency are looking for humanity and understanding a moment beyond just like who's in the room, like understanding and not even understanding the exact moment, but the moment in time of what you're capturing.
Yeah, absolutely. I was always on a lookout for these, I call them fleeting moments or little moments that do tell you a lot about the humanity of the person, of the man, someday the woman. That was absolutely forefront in my mind. There are times, I will say, that it's also important to show who's in the room. I always was very conscious of every boring meeting I was in to try to make a few overall pictures, because for all our pictures, when you're the White House photographer, end up at the National Archives, and it's always important when you can to show who's in the room for any given meeting. So that I was always thinking about the archive, not about whether the White House communications office wanted to post a picture on their Instagram site or something. That was not my forefront in my mind. What was forefront in my mind is I'm making pictures for the historical archive, and I think that's the way you have to look at that job. And I will make that absolutely clear to the incoming White House photographer that he needs to get back to the approach that I took, which is the approach that everyone in that job should take. That seems to be missing from the current administration.
Every so often the press takes a picture, and as you were describing that, it reminds me of those big wide shots around the table, and I'm not familiar enough with the White House to tell you what room it's in, but it's all men, almost always all men, and they're almost always all white, but maybe Ben Carson's in that meeting, so he'd be the black guy in it. And you're right, you get this moment of like, wow, it's 2020, 2019. And like, this is what American leadership at the highest levels in politics and government look like.
Yeah, and look at today's announcement with Joe Biden for the Attorney General's office. You have Merrick Garland, who's a white guy, but the three people under him, 2 women, and 2 people of color. Or maybe it's 3 women, actually. I'm trying to remember who the third person is. And I think the way he's shaping his cabinet, he's following through with what he said he was going to do, that he was going to have people around him that look like America. And that's what he's done. I mean, you can criticize this choice or that choice. That's totally okay. But look at the caliber of people that he's choosing, and the fact that they really do represent our country, the look of our country.
I always feel like when people get away with a thing, I think 9/11 is a good example, because there was a test before, right? That people are not super familiar with, but there was an effort to figure out, could you in fact, how do you think about bringing an explosive into the World Trade Center, right? And I had friends who were in the building on that day who told me, because they had been in the building working as bankers in the World Trade Center years before, that the minute they, were told to evacuate, there were some people who didn't, or some people who went to get their stuff, or some people who didn't think it was real. But I had a handful of friends who worked in a certain company who said, I was in it once before, And I grabbed my stuff and I got out because and I knew what was happening when other people sometimes had to be convinced, because I do think, I mean, all of us, when there's a fire alarm goes off, we're kind of like, it's probably just a test because we've been through a million tests. And I wonder, now that there's been so much damage, I think, to American democracy, but also just America generally, does someone come back in, for the next try, who's smarter, right? The people who invaded the Capitol, they invaded and they took selfies. They literally went through, they stole mail, so that's a federal offense. They did a lot of damage, it looks like, but there was no military agenda. But they definitely showed a strategy for how to enter and breach a building that's supposed to be defended. They got close access to elected officials, many of whom they were literally threatening. And so I always wonder, I feel like when people aren't stopped, or they're not, Trump's a good example. When you impeach somebody and you don't ask for evidence and you don't take it the full way, you open up, the person doesn't learn their lesson. They don't. They learn the lesson of, I can get away with this. And I worry that the entire Trump presidency is a bit of a lesson in being racist. Gets a lot of people. Some of them are kind of crazy, but you know what? They have a lot of fervor, and there's a lot of stuff you can get away with, even with people who know better, who will, for political expediency, follow you down the gilded path. I worry a lot about that. That the decency, and I think Joe Biden is a decent human being. I think people on both sides of the aisle have said that. I worry that the next iteration, or after that, people have learned their lesson, and a smarter, less bungling criminal will do a better job of helping dismantle democracy, frankly.
Well, it's interesting. One of the things that I was thinking about yesterday is my many friends in the Secret Service, whose job is to protect the president, are not freaking out, but are probably going to make some major adjustments for the inauguration after what happened. We saw those protesters on the actual stand where Biden is going to get sworn in, and where the camera platform where the photographers and the videographers are going to be. One other thought that came to me as you were talking is the Capitol is a big place. Everybody knows the Dome, but there's also
we've all been lost in it and yelled at because we got in the wrong entrance.
The House on one side, the Senate on the other side. There's many floors. There had to be some planning involved, not just to get inside the Capitol, but to know where to go. Because if you were to just go into the Capitol for the first time and wanted to go to the House floor, you could never find it. You couldn't find the Speaker's office.
Yeah,
you couldn't find the Speaker's office. So
no,
somebody had done some planning on here. Here's how you get to the Senate floor. Here's how you get to the House floor. Here's how you get to the Speaker's office. I would get lost there all the time. And this is when I worked for the Chicago Tribune, and I was occasionally on Capitol Hill covering, different things. I'd get lost going from one part of the Capitol to the other part of the Capitol. So there's going to have to be some reporting on how this was planned out, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. And again, I never covered Capitol Hill, but I was there just enough to think I had a little bit of a sense of direction about it, which meant you always got lost. You always had to ask some nice person about, where am I going? How do I get there? And it unfolded very quickly and very accurately in terms of where they ended up. I can't imagine how that could happen without having someone either guide you in or be helpful. There are some people who've raised that, how did they know? What do you think has been the biggest loss of this time. I mean, again, back to your photos. I think the nice thing about when you look at your photo book or the exhibits or the things that you've posted, there was just such great sense of opportunity and sense of joy. And even when things were difficult, it didn't feel like people in this picture are evil. It felt like these are people who are trying to struggle through a thing. Again, I guess the strategy of humanizing. And I don't know, I don't see a lot of photos coming out of this last 4 years of hope and joy and people laughing, right? It's been police and brutality and wailing and anger and people spitting in each other's faces and yelling at each other. And again, it reminds me of those photos, so many of them from the 50s and 60s when Black people were integrating schools, and there's a crowd of, it's a lone Black, often a woman, hunched over her school books, and people behind her just, and that too captures that era. Not just that moment in that girl's life, but like what America was dealing with. I guess, what do you see as the picture of this era? What is the one thing that sticks out to you that is definitive of what we've been through?
I think the one thing that sticks out to me is well, beyond yesterday, directly tied to the president, is that stupid photo op he did holding up the Bible, and it really symbolized that it's all about himself. Nothing is about us. It's just about himself. He governed. Well, he didn't really govern, but he did the job marketing himself. That was it. I mean, it was nothing more than that. I mean, with President Obama, I always felt that whether you agreed or disagreed with him, whether you agreed or disagreed with decisions he made, that he was governing for the people. And one of the great things about being the White House photographer is you see every compartment of his life. You're there with the family when they're opening Christmas presents on Christmas morning. You're in the Situation Room when he's agonizing over a decision that there's no good outcome. And he was the same core character of a person in all those different compartments. And I don't think there's any character, at least I haven't seen it, and it comes across in the photographs. There's no character to this guy. I mean, he has no decency. He has no humanity. He doesn't have any love in himself at all. It's just about him. And I've taken recently to not calling him a con man, but calling him a mobster, because in many ways that's what he is.
There's a guy, I think it was Rick Wilson, who was part of Project Lincoln, or the Lincoln Project, I might have it backwards, who said, everything Trump touches dies. I believe he's the guy. And you really, once he said it, you'd watch it, things wilt on them. Everybody who has sold their soul over the last 4.5 years, more in some cases, watch as he turns on them. There's no character there. There's nothing that believes in anything. And it comes through in the photos, and it comes through in every which way.
Well, the interesting thing, too, is you now have, the Bill Barrs, the John Kellys, the people of that caliber speaking out. And
300 hours to go.
Wait a minute. Where were you, even Lindsey Graham yesterday? Where have you been? What you're part of this. What's happened? You've aided and abetted this guy for 4 years, and now with 13 days left, you've decided, okay, I better speak out because somebody, we could all see this coming. You talk to the reporters, I was reading I can't remember if it was a story or a tweet by Maggie Haberman last night or this morning, and she's like, nobody should be surprised by this. I'm paraphrasing what she said. She didn't use those exact words, but her point was, you've seen this coming for 4 years, maybe 5 years, that if he was going to be president, this is what he wants. He wants a civil war.
Well, I'm hopeful that this 2021 brings us better things than 2020 brought us, and that part of that will be on January 20th when we move into a new era.
Well, and you asked about hope. I mean, one of the hopeful things this past year, too, was that there were people of all colors, all ages, all genders out there peacefully protesting what had happened to George Floyd in Minneapolis and Breonna Taylor. 95% of which was peaceful. And it was extraordinary to even just here in Madison to go out and not just see African Americans in the street, but to see white people and women, elderly, young, kids, families, teenagers. That gives me hope.
You're going to make me optimistic at the end of this day anyway, because I think you're right. I do. I actually think the number of, as awful as Trump has been, and I think he's been horrifically awful, I think he has opened a lot of people's eyes to something that what I would describe as very good people would have said does not exist. Pete Souza, it's so nice to see you. Thanks for talking with me. I really appreciate all your time.
Thanks for having me on.